Are we starting? Do, 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 do. Oh, we're starting. All right. Hey, everybody. Before we start, just wanted to say, I want to take some time before this kind of recording goes up to address some current issues happening in the world right now in terms of racism and privilege. I just wanted to represent the three of us here at this book club. We acknowledge that there is systemic racism both in the United States and in Canada. We also know that we're not experts and we cannot speak to these topics in a professional, compassionate, and caring manner. For that, we kind of encourage you guys, if you guys have the time, please look out and search out information on racism and its impact on people. And couple of things, I found that watching the Netflix documentary 13th has been really eye-opening for me in terms of the history of systemic racism in America. So I encourage you guys, if you guys want to watch something instead of reading something, I would encourage you to watch that documentary. The book we're about to discuss, this book here, revolves around music and the struggle for Black artists to be recognized and treated fairly, both in the history of the Apollo Theater in Harlem to present day. As such, we're not really going to shy away from bringing things that we've kind of learned through reading a book, but we'll keep our personal opinions and insights down to a minimum. We want to use this time as a way to discuss the book and encourage conversations about how we can treat each other better moving forward. We are also mindful that there's a lot of terminology in the book that will be considered as derogatory or not in good taste. So we're not going to use them, but also understand that these are literal quotes from interviews that were made during writing this book. So we ourselves can't change the words in the book, but we will still try to discuss topics with respect and dignity. Thank you so much for your support, and we hope you enjoy our discussion on Showtime at the Apollo by Ted Fox. So, this book was Amanda's pick, and this was in our book club, our first graphic novel and my first graphic novel. I know manga, but this is my first graphic novel. So Amanda, how did you find this book?
I really liked it. It was difficult at certain points when a topic, I think we talked about this a little bit, when a topic was brought up and then it's like name, and you're like, okay, I can't keep all the names straight, but I understand the general idea of what is being talked about right now. But other than that, I really liked it because it does kind of put a lot of information in a very approachable way, at least for me. But there's always going to be details that are missed in a graphic novel. And I would imagine that because this was a graphic novel of a novel, then the actual book has more things that we could probably glean out of it. Otherwise, this book would be massive to put everything in. But yeah, I really liked it. I thought it was really cool. And I learned a lot of stuff in here that I did not know before. So, yeah.
Karen, what about you?
I felt very similarly. So it's divided up into different chapters going through each chronological genre or whatever focus. And I found that in about each of those sections, there was one really interesting thing. There was some nugget of that I felt like they should have focused on that. But there was almost this push to tell us all of the different names of the people that influenced it, that, yeah, just like Amanda said, it just kind of got a little name heavy, whereas I maybe would have rather the name be paired with a fact.
Yeah.
But otherwise, I quite enjoyed it.
Yeah, I think I agree with all of you as well. I think personally for myself, maybe it's because I spend so much time reading manga. I read something like this, it's essentially a comic strip. I read a comic strip in a certain way. And in Japan, all the mangas, they're all presented in a certain way. There is an order, there is a consistency in every publishing group, every publishing company, they do it all the same way. So for me, I was like, oh, okay. So obviously coming into this, I was used to one certain way. So again, I guess reading, I think the first third of the book, I was struggling to try and keep my eyes on the words without getting really kind of drawn into the pictures. And then I found that sometimes there wasn't enough information in the words. So I would just skip it, but then I would lose the name because the only important information in the paragraph was just the name. And then I would look at the picture and I'd be like, who is this?
Yeah.
And I think for me, like, in terms of reading the book, the thing for me was just there was some inconsistencies in terms of like putting the like graphic novel together. I was just talking to Amanda about this. Like there would be these like pictures of all these groups of performers. Let's say there's 4 of them, and then 3 of them would have titles as who they are, and the 4th one, their name would be in a paragraph. So then I would just assume that 3rd group was one of the other groups.
Yeah.
And then I read I was like, oh, wait, okay, whoa. So I had to go back, look at the picture, be like, oh, you're this group. All right. So I think I agree. I think that I understand why there were so many names, right? Because they really wanted to show the impact, right, of the sheer amount of talent that was moving through. And I mean, even if you think about the roster today at the Apollo, right, there's so many people going through it, right? Sometimes, like, I think it's like if you were to talk about, like, let's say if you were to sit down with a professor, like a musicologist, right, and you were to talk to them about their speciality, like, for example, Susan Lewis Hammond, right? Her speciality is like medieval music. She would just be dropping names right, left, and center because she knows all these names, right? Like it's not just the Josquin des Prés, it's not the Palestrina. She knows everything. So I think that's what happened, right? Was when you were talking about these people, like interviewing them, they would be like, oh yeah, and there was this person, and oh yeah, like this person did a great show, and I headlined this person. So I understood why, right? Because in the excitement of reliving the history, especially if you were a performer there, you want to highlight all your friends. You want to highlight that community during that time. I just wasn't sure, like for parts of the book, if it worked with pictures, especially because I think if there were actual pictures, I would have been able to be like, oh, like I could even tell by like the graininess of the photo or how they dressed. This is a completely different generation of performer. This is a completely different style. The costumes are different. The hairstyles are different, right? And for me, I would have been like, yes, immediately. But I think because James Otis, I think he was like, was he someone that performed at the Apollo too? I believe he did. Yeah, but like because of the illustration, if you look here, right, even at the very like the front here, all these people are from different periods of time. All of them are from different decades from the Apollo, but because the art style is very simplistic, right? Like like that, like the one on the right is Louis Armstrong because of the way that he tilts his like trumpet. Yeah. So there's like what Karen said, right? There's those nuggets, right? That person, you know exactly who that person is because you've seen them so much, but then you lose so much of the details because I can't differentiate, right? And for me, that's the art style, really, right? Yeah. I think for this one here, personally, I think I would have liked reading the book first, right? And then grabbing more information because I think through going through this, I learned a lot, but then I realized how much I don't know.
Yeah.
And there's like so many people and even the genres. Like I am not very good at differentiating between the genres, especially in the 20th century. And for me, I was just like just slammed with all this information. And I just realized, wow, I have to do so much more. I have to like really go through and read more stuff here, which I think is really cool because like it's got me excited about reading other books. But for me, I got lost sometimes, like with like the inconsistency sometimes in the way that they put the book together. And then how sometimes the pictures would draw me away from the words and I wouldn't read anything, or vice versa, where I realized the pictures didn't do any good. So then I just read the words and I just skipped the pictures.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel the same where it's almost like they had too much information and they had to distill it.
Yeah.
And in that distillation, they lost some of the information. So yes, you have this whole name like list of all of these people in this specific genre, but you almost have to go out and find out more for yourself because they had to take out so many words in order to not inundate you with so much wordage that you kind of are like, okay, now I have all these names.
Yeah.
Okay. You know, it was, yeah. I think it got too distilled. or the focus wasn't quite, it was almost like they didn't want to leave anybody out.
Mhm.
So they had to mention everybody. So that part really did kind of make it drag a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And they go into some of the details of, and it's not even just like the performers at the Apollo, but like the whole stream of like who owned it first, and then where did the Apollo name came from, and then it went from this family to this family who changed it over to this, and then they owned these things. So the beginning of this book, I actually took me a long time because I was trying to figure out who owned the Apollo and where did it come from. And it's like, oh, these guys owned it. And then they also owned all these other theaters that they made competition for themselves. So they get all the winnings. Like it was just interesting that there was a lot of detail in that portion of kind of how it kind of came to be and how it came to be this amazing theater, but there was a lot of stuff kind of in the way of it actually becoming, which is, I don't know, that was like the whole first one.
Here's a question that I just thought of as you were talking about that, because you're saying like they focus so much on the how the building came about, because that's easy to find. Those are facts and stuff.
Yeah.
Perhaps Ted Fox is not a musician.
Maybe.
So he couldn't, I might have to read his bio, but it almost reads like that, right? It's like, here's all these names and here's kind of the basics with this genre, but there's it doesn't go a step further. It doesn't talk about the rhythms that were used. It talks about the instruments.
Right? Because there was a lot in the beginning where a lot of the conversation revolved around like who was vying to purchase it first. Who this group or this family, it was the Schiffman family who had purchased all these little theaters. Like they just wanted this Apollo, and then they were at battles with this other theater, and then finally took out the other. Like there was so much of that I find that it really kind of got me interested in how it became. And then it was like, okay, it became, and now all this happened. And it was just like the quick swipe over until the very end. And I found the end also very interesting. So I have like, there was the two
like
bookends.
Yeah, they're bookends.
Massive amount of information in the middle that, like you said, was a little bit much, where I would finish a decade, like I finished the 50s. I'm like, okay, I need to stop because I have to process all the things, all the things that happened in the past 10 pages, but it was 10 years. So,
just to clarify what I was saying, I'm reading the bio on the little flap, and it says he's a longtime manager and producer of the Grammy Award-winning artist Buckwheat Zydeco. So he's a music manager and producer. That doesn't mean he's a musician.
No, but
it's in the world.
Of how it came to be.
Yeah. Two things. Number one, it's funny that you brought up the beginning and the end. For me, even though the information was historical, it was more economics and stuff, I found that the graphic novel worked for that because there was process. There was progress. I could see the moving parts coming together. That made total sense for the graphic novel. What didn't make sense was these stills of pictures, because it didn't feel like there was any movement through the middle of the book. So I just found myself being stuck. And I totally agree with you, Amanda. After each chapter, I'd be like, whew, okay, time to look up some of these like people and listen to their music, because they would describe the music in a way where they're like, oh, we're talking like, so this book, I assumed like we're talking to people who already understand all the jargon. They know what soul music is, so we don't have to explain what it is. So I had looked up some of these artists and listened to them. It's like, oh, that's what the soundscape was during that time. It is fundamentally different, but the book doesn't do a good job at explaining them so differently for them to be warranted as a chapter in and of itself, right? Because essentially it was like each chapter was a decade, and each decade had its own type of music. I wonder, like, I think I'm going to buy the actual book itself. I wonder after reading the book if it would have made more sense for them. Like I said, this is a love project, right? But I wonder if it would make more sense for them if they spent each chapter as a volume in and of itself.
Yeah.
Where they spend like put way more like stuff, like even a page where there's information, like an actual block of information talking about it, and then really focusing on that one decade in a volume of like 7 or something.
Yeah.
And then that way you could buy all 7 volumes, kind of, you know, if you wanted to, kind of thing.
You could have the one that's the focus on the bebop and the one that's focused on the gospel.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, I agree, because then they're not worried about just having the names.
Mm-hmm.
They're saying, here's a bunch of names, here's a story with one of the names and how it bled, how it inspired this person, and this person changed it, and then it became this. Like, that's what we want. We want the meat.
Yeah.
And I think you're right. They, in an effort to shove it all into one book, it just loses just even the definitions.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, because I think there were some when they were describing the actual new form, the new genre of music, where it worked. I was like, oh, so like when they were talking about how they talked about the gospel, right? How they introduced gospel into the Apollo, and then they would change certain words, right, to make it more palatable for a general public. That made sense because I knew what gospel sounded like.
Yeah.
And I've heard, you know, like what we call secular gospel before.
Yeah.
So I was like, oh, I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah.
But then there were things where it's just like, this is blues. And I was like, okay, I kind of understand blues. And then I was like, oh, okay, I still only kind of understand blues. And then you add rhythm and blues on top. I was like, so the rhythm was important. And that's what made the rhythm and blues like less bluesy, but I'm still not really sure what blues is. So like, that's where I got a little bit confused. And then I think there was this one part, I can't remember her name. I'm so sorry. But she has, it was a classically trained piano player. And she was like young, like 13, and she could play all these things. And she knew all the chord progressions, but no one had any idea what she was talking about. And I was like, oh, that's so cute. But then that was the only part of theory that was thrown in.
Yeah.
And then that was it. And I was like, oh, whoa, because they were trying to explain the difference between her playing the 12-bar blues versus this new style. I was like, this is really cool. Maybe they're going to throw some theoretical knowledge in here. Nope. And it wasn't enough there.
And we were talking about, like, going back to what you said about having them in volumes. Like, we talked about this before, but how cool would it be if this was one of those textbooks that we had when we were doing music school? And when because like, how many, was it 2 years? 2 years of straight up, you know, Western European, you know, here's the Romantic and the Baroque and all these kind of things, but we never really got a chance to see stuff like this, which would have been really cool if we had those volumes. And then we actually put in the stuff that was like, here's the paragraph, here's what 12 bars blues is.
Mm-hmm.
Here's how it differentiates this. Like, I feel like to have that kind of explanation, like you said, that kind of delved into a little bit of the meat would probably help it. But again, you know, when we talk about books with the music, is it written for a music audience or is it written for an audience that appreciates music? Because it could be two different things. Like, we know the chord progressions, we know when they talk about, when they played this, you know, too forte, too bright, like, we know that kind of stuff. But if you don't have that training, like,
you're right. It has to do with who the audience is.
Right,
is the audience more interested in the history of the theater, or are they interested in the music of the theater? And we're sort of more, I think we want to have more of the music, and we didn't particularly get that, but maybe we weren't that audience if that's what we were looking for.
Yeah. And I mean, like, and just like the fact that like this, like I mentioned before, right? This graphic novel is like someone's love project, right? Mm-hmm. And it is his retelling of the story based off of his perspective, right? What is the most important things he wants to highlight? And it's like all these people, like he wants to highlight the fact that the Apollo helped all these people's, like, you know, careers. And I think in terms, like, after reading this, A, I realized I don't know as much as I thought. And B, this was not written for me, but I can still appreciate it, right? This was written for people who know all of these genres and all of these styles. They live and breathe this stuff, so they would know every single name. They knew every single, like, gimmick. They knew what they, like, some of these people who would buy this book went to these shows
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
That kind of thing. And we just don't have that like firsthand knowledge and firsthand experience.
Yeah.
I feel though too, this could be the perfect springboard.
Yeah.
Get into
Yeah.
it. Like I now kind of want to read about the history, but again, you would have to read the history of R&B, the history of not with the Apollo as the focus, but with that specific genre. And they even include a playlist, which I
saw that.
Yeah, I know.
I haven't had a chance to listen through it yet, but I'm jonesing to go see it or listen to it.
There's also a teacher's guide and discussion questions available online.
Yeah.
Which is really cool.
Could you imagine if you had a 13-week course in college? Each week was a chapter, and the professor would show you clips, right? Live recordings, listening to stuff, talking about different people because they were experts on this. And this was supplementary reading. A, how many people would actually finish this book? And B, how many people would actually keep this book in the library forever?
Yeah.
Right. It's just like, it would be such a cool tool to like what Karen said, like, this is a great way to be like, hey, this is how you can jump into this. Yeah. And if you could imagine a professor or someone who knew everything, who could lead you through a little bit more information each week, a different chapter.
Yeah.
Right. And then all of a sudden you'd have the best of both worlds. You have something that's easy to get into with the expert knowledge, right? That would be kind of superimposed on top of that. You're like, oh, they didn't really talk about this one person, but I know a lot of information about this one person. Let's talk about this one person, right? So I think I think it's just like, oh, this is our educator's most coming in. It's like, how can we make this into a class?
Right? Because I was saying to you, like, this would be really cool for like a high school like music exploratories class.
Yeah.
Like, where you only have them for, I think.
It's like 11 weeks.
Yeah, it's like 8 to 12 weeks or something like we're regarding. But like, how cool would be like, okay, finish, 2 chapters of this. We will do 2 chapters of this in the next couple of weeks. Boom, let's take a look at Louis Armstrong and the jazz. Let's take a look at how bebop was different than big band. Like, how cool would that be to do that and to get like actual history out of it?
Yeah.
So yeah.
And I was just thinking, like, the assignment, what you could do is like all the names that are like dropped here. You're like, all right, so everyone here's a hat. Everyone picks one person, and they have to write a paragraph, right? Just a paragraph on this person and showcase one piece, right? One piece that like one song that they wrote, and you can show it to the class, and then we can all listen to it, right?
The education like thing that you could do with this.
I was just gonna say, RCM, if you're watching this. If your history books were like this, everyone would take your exams.
And pay
everyone. Because then all of a sudden it becomes more fun. You're using different media, right? Multimedia, and stringing it together. And what better way? Because like I think a lot of times, like especially with classical music, we get our own modern day interpretations of what they're supposed to sound like. We literally have video footage of these people performing their original music the original way, like the authentic way that they thought should have sounded at that time, right? It would be so cool because we have firsthand, like we have like primary sources back up this. It would be so cool. Like, come on, RCM, do something for like this type of history. I guarantee it would be so much fun. It would be so much fun.
Yeah. Imagine if our history classes were done in graphic novel form. If we're learning about Gregorian chant through.
Karen, Hildegard von Blingen.
Oh yes. So not to be confused with the original Hildegard von Bingen, but there's this music channel. Okay, now I've totally gone down this whole topic of YouTube. It's called Bardcore. Where they remake modern pop songs as in like the medieval style. So one of the channels that I got sucked into was Hildegard von Bingen, and they do like they change the words to make them sort of old timey. They have the instruments, and actually, if you listen to her singing, it's it's very much in the style of the straight. Sorry, we're totally off topic, but.
I've actually shared those videos with my students because they're going through the Middle Ages right now.
Yeah.
Oh.
and they're loving it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because like I was like, all right, so this one video here, when you're listening to her, first of all, it's not time period appropriate because females wouldn't be singing at the time. But look past the fact these instruments are being used, and then they learn what the instruments sound like,
Yeah.
and you can trick them. See,
Yeah.
like
No,
You
I think
tend to
females
learn-
can sing. You think about a nunnery.
yeah. So nunneries, right? But like during like traveling performances, right? It would have
Right.
been like
I see
aristocratic
what you mean.
male performers,
Like
unfortunately,
the
right?
troubadours.
Yeah, the troubadours, right? Because she would like this would have been a troubadour kind of like ensemble, and then we talk about like how like this one is written for the instruments, but back then it was all improvised, so it wouldn't have this. It would have been a different concert of instruments, and using this stuff, like talking about this book, using these types of things, multimedia,
Yeah.
teach children to meet them halfway to be like, hey, look. This is written in a medieval style, but this is pumped up kicks, and you know this song. You know?
Could you imagine though, like, because we did have one semester that was sort of popular culture music, but it sort of ended around 1970. So, you know, we were learning the Chuck Berrys and we were learning Otis Redding and Aretha Franklin, but it was so brief. It was like Emmy 401 or something. It was right before we got into all the mathy stuff.
Yeah.
Not Emmy. Sorry, it was music.
Yeah.
Music. It was 301. Anyway, so we actually did kind of delve into the history of rock and roll, but it was so brief, and we just wanted more. Just
If you wanted more, you took the Achilles class. That was the history of rock, and they had that as I think there were 3 of them that were options, and he only offered them in the summer.
they were geared not just towards music students.
Yes.
They were geared towards anybody that was interested.
And it was definitely an elective class. It was not anywhere in the prerequisites for our.
I think in terms of that, it's just like that was unfortunately, that was kind of the bias that we had to deal with in college, where this type of music was not considered academic music, right? So then, depending on the professor, like you either got 2 or 3 weeks of this like bebop and like Motown, or you got 1 class.
Yeah.
Right.
I would have. Oh my goodness! I would have rather spent an entire year getting into the evolution of pop music, rock and roll, R&B, jazz. I would rather get into all of that than stupid like Stockhausen, where you're like, this is just noise.
Because realistically, once we finish our degree, what do the kids want to play? They want to play the pop songs. They want to play the stuff like I teach beginning band, and there's no way I could be like, guys, 1-5-1. You got to end in the 1 chord. Where's my third? Like they're not going to care. First of all, they're not going to care. I wouldn't even bother. But you know, I'm like, what would you guys like to play? We want to play Shut Up and Dance. And I'm like, okay, well, there's no band arrangement for that. It's like, what else do you want to play? So you pull out these things that actually, like I find going into like the really ones, you find the ones that sound poppy, and you find the ones that sound fun, because that's what they're going to get into. So at least with us knowing the history behind it, that helps us as teachers too, because you're like, did you know this is where this came from? This is where popular music came from. It'd be and it like you said, it's more relevant for now. Like if it was the 90s and we were doing the same type of thing and we ended at the 70s, okay, I get it, yeah. But to end our education, our academic education of music history at like 1975, it's like, yeah, now there's like, 44, 45 years worth of music that we haven't even looked at.
Yeah.
And a lot of things have changed in 45 years of music.
I think it just speaks to like like our collegiate system, and the fact that like unfortunately the professors that we study under, they study historical music, and they only specialize in historical music. Even the contemporary composers, their specialty is like Schoenberg, right? And Schoenberg has been dead for a while. His style of music has been dead for a while, right? So pair that with this idea that classical contemporary music is better than pop music, and that's why you never see
more academic.
Yeah, more academic, right? Because it's more complex. And we know from experience that complex doesn't mean good, right? Complex doesn't mean influential. It doesn't mean that it's impactful to the students that we teach or the culture that we have around us, right? Like sometimes the best pieces, right? I know, like for example, the European Union's like the anthem is the fourth movement of the Symphony Number 9, but like sometimes the most impactful things are small songs, like growing up, like so many Christians would rally behind Amazing Grace.
Yeah.
Amazing Grace is a folk song, very simple, 1-5-1 chords all the way through. Like it's only like 16 bars long, but it has more impact than Symphony Number 9 to the general public because people can understand it. People can perceive what it means, even if they don't believe in God. They can hear the message and hum the melody, right? And I think in history that has happened time and time again, right? We always say like Bach was super complicated, but Handel was popular, right?
Yeah.
People could hear Handel's music and memorize it.
Yeah.
People appreciated Bach, but didn't understand what was going on, right? And you see the time and time and again, like we always kind of look down on certain genres, like for example, all of these genres that are in here, right? And we kind of relegate them to like, oh, that's just like Afro-American music, right? Rap is just Afro-American music. We don't really truly understand that. It's not academic, so we don't really talk about it. But I think it's not because all professors think that way, it's because few of them specialize in this field, right? And I think the more, like, for example, especially like a lot of our colleagues and even younger than us, the more people start specializing in this stuff. Like we have a class on the music of Beyonce at UVic.
Yeah.
Right? The more these classes take popularity in school and the more they realize, oh wow, people actually want to learn about this, and it is actually quite complicated. It's not easy to write something like this that will sell millions of records. It's not easy. There is some type of formula, there is a way to write it, there is a structure to write these types of music. I think if we get to that point, then we realize, oh, we can actually have an entire degree just on this alone, just on 70 years of music alone. Right?
So one of the things that they did focus quite a lot on was it wasn't just about the music, it was about the performance.
Yes.
So if you, yeah, sure, if the music was great, whatever, but if you were completely dead and dull, the audience would eat you alive. You had to have some sort of vivacious presence in order to get the audience on your side. So it was very much both about the music and the performance. It wasn't just, like, oh, here's this catchy little tune. No, it's like catchy little tune plus this guy tap dances, or plus there's a skit with it, or plus there's like these wicked dance moves.
Yeah.
Like there was
the
performance was the big thing.
And the funny thing is, like, we as classical performers are often told we shouldn't showboat, right? Yeah. Still, right? Don't be like long, we flip around everywhere. Like the music should speak for itself, right? The music should speak for itself. And the irony is that that's probably one of the reasons why classical music performances aren't as popular, because people want to relate to you. They want to relate to your story, even if it's just your struggle to get to where you are. If they can relate to that, they can see through your performance, right? And for some people, it's the settings and the set designs and the props, but it's the same thing. They want to relate. In the music is kind of like the reason why they draw you in, but like your story is what keeps them there. You have to have something because people need to understand. And a lot of the genres that they talked about, people were coming into the Apollo because they wanted to escape real life, because real life was really tough, and they needed that like bigger than life, larger than life kind of like performance in front of them, just to give them that 1 hour in a day where they could just chill out and be like, I'm at the Apollo. I get to watch someone be stunning, right? And I don't have to worry about my life just for this hour.
Yeah. Wasn't there that story of those? Sorry.
It was going back to like the performance of not just the musicians, but like the comedians and the politicians and the actors and like the mimes and the, like you said, the dancing. I immediately thought of this one page where they talked about this pair of dancers, and one of them would like flip over somebody else and there'd be like two splits. And I remember cringing, being like, ow, because they're like, they jumped up 5 feet and then bam, land with a split. And you're like, that is a performance.
Yeah.
And you can see some of that kind of stuff, like when you watch shows like America's Got Talent, or like World of Dance, or Britain's Got or X Factor,
or even like Drag Race.
Yeah, like any one of those ones, it's all about like the performance. And if the audience, because we talked about this, if the audience didn't like you, you were kind of done. Like, you need to win over that audience at the Apollo, and once they cheer for you, okay, you made it. But it was also kind of interesting seeing how some of the big names going on, and they're like, I can't go on, I'm too nervous. And you're like, you're a huge name that performed in front of all these people, and you're too nervous to get onto the stage at the Apollo. That's crazy. But yeah, no, like when you said about the performances, I was thinking of not just the musicians, but like everybody else that has stepped foot on that stage, and is just looking partially for approval, and kind of like to prove to themselves, like, I've done it. This is my big thing. So
yeah, and I think it brings me back to a couple of things I remember like learning going through school. It's just like you read some of this, like there were injuries, like career-ending injuries that were documented in this book. People like doing the splits to the point where they couldn't do it anymore. There were people who were doing all these crazy stunts, going all out, right? Trying to win this audience. But when you kind of take a couple of steps back, lots of performers, classical and non-classical, hurt themselves, pushing themselves. Robert Schumann, for example, right, destroyed his hand because he wanted to be as good as his wife, but he could never be, and he destroyed his career, pushing himself so far. And we have heard of audiences not appreciating how a certain person dressed in a classical performance. I think there was like a Yuzhe Wang, or where she comes up and she's wearing this like cocktail, skinny, like short dress, playing like Rachmaninoff, and people booed at her because they were like, this is a classical performance. You shouldn't be wearing that. That's too sexy. Yeah, it should be a ball gown, right? It's like, yes, we can talk about like misogyny and all that stuff like that, but the audience in the end tells you whether you're going to make it or not. Right? If you cannot win the audience, they're not coming back the next day. So if you boil it down to the basics, you have to go all out and you have to win that audience, right? Yeah. Your fame does not guarantee you're coming back tomorrow, right? Yeah. And I think that ruthlessness, that cutthroatness of performance and just you had friends, but you were all competitors for the same thing. That's what drives performing arts to push and push and push, right? That's why like gymnasts, right? And even like sports, that's why they push, because it's that competitiveness. Like they want to represent their country, they want to be the best, and they have to go. And it isn't for everyone, right? Not everyone can do it. Like what Amanda mentioned, right? There are some people who were famous who just couldn't perform at the Apollo. It was too nerve-wracking for them.
And it's interesting because it's not even that, but like the politics of the Apollo itself, where the audience determines like where your dressing room is going to be, and the audience determines where you land in the schedule of when you perform, which is always interesting. And I don't know how I will always remember this, but to be like, when you start up and you're really green, you are at the very top, and you got to run your ass down, and you got to run yourself back up and run yourself down. And it's always interesting to see like the inner politics of the Apollo as well, and how in the back, what are you going to do in the back when you're not performing? We play poker, for fun.
Yeah, I liked that aspect of the book because
too.
it gave a story, it gave a behind the scenes. It wasn't just about performances, it was about what happens when they get off the stage.
And the camaraderie that happens behind there too, when they're like, no, you got this. Like, you're a great singer, you got a great voice, just get up on there and do it. And the support that the artists show for each other, whether it be somebody that's seasoned versus somebody that's green, which is really, it's really cool. And I think that's kind of what I like more about this book, was that they talked about the stuff that happened behind the scenes as opposed to just the people on the stage.
Yeah.
Although I was kind of appalled that we don't have theaters now that we can pay $1 for and stay all day at. I was like, they paid $1 and they got to sit there the entire day and watch all the performances. We should have that now.
That would be like a music festival, right? Where you pay $20, you get the little wristband, and you go for the whole day. Like that, I think that would be the equivalent.
Yeah, it's our equivalent of like Rifflandia, really.
But it's different, right? Like I think because we know these names, and to have the idea of like I could have like back in whenever I could pay $1 and I could sit and I could listen to the Jackson 5, I could listen to Louis, and I could listen to Ella, and I could watch a comic act, and it was all one day of these greats. And we probably do have stuff like that, but they're ridiculous.
It was cultural to that community at the time as well, right? Like I think they did these things knowing that having people in the stands was more important than making a quick buck, like literally a quick buck, right? Because they needed, like the performers needed the people sitting there, especially the ones that were new. So what was the easiest way to do it was to have just people who were just always going to be there the entire day. So at least you have an audience, and then they would be like, did you see this person? He was amazing. Oh, you didn't see him? Well, he's new, right?
Yeah.
And that kind of worked. And obviously throughout the book, they changed that.
Yeah.
And they had to change it because all of a sudden the theater was becoming so popular that they had to, right, to adjust, to kind of like reinvent themselves. Yeah, I thought it was really cool, like how like the new person was at the very top. And also they had that rehearsal hall downstairs where it's like you're done a number and they're rehearsing for the next one right while someone else is performing upstairs. And there's back and forth and there's no stopping. Everyone's running up and down, right? And I know that it's crazy thinking about it, but even if you think about the way that we have to handle like Friday music and stuff, and even like for example like our own student recitals, we're running around grabbing stuff. Like it's like, and the audience only gets to see the stage. They don't understand there's all this preparation leading up to it. The kids like practicing their music, getting dressed, lining up or whatever. Like there is a lot of happenstance behind the scenes, and it was really cool. Yeah, you're right. Really cool to see that. Like both the pretty and the ugly, right? I remember there was one of the interviewees. She would like throw things onto the stage to like I can't remember where it was, but she was like, she was like a prankster when she was younger. She would run up to like the top rafters and like just throw stuff at the performers down on the bottom. And she was like, I was never caught, like I was such a troublemaker when I was younger, right? And you're just like, and you had to just kind of deal with that, right? And also, when you bombed, people would come around you and be like, maybe you should try this next time. Like this really worked for me. So it was like an open, like, be kind, but be critical, right? Like, this is how you can do better. If you want to be better, if you want to be back, this is what worked for me. Try this, right? So it was always like this kind of mentorship program, constantly helping each other out. And there was no there was obviously pressure if like the act before you was too good. Like there was, like they said, there were certain acts that were so good they had to put it at the very end, right? But this whole like freely sharing information with everyone, like telling them, this is my experience, this worked here, this didn't work, right? There was no like animosity, especially like at the beginning of the Apollo.
And essentially the Apollo was kind of this whetstone where people would hone their talent. Like they'd come in and they'd be raw and they'd be doing the amateur night and it'd be like, oh, this is good. Like they would quickly learn what worked, what didn't. Then they had to, get rid of the stuff that doesn't work, focus on the stuff that does, and then that kind of became their thing. So it basically gave them a place to, I was going to say like a lab test, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a dry run.
Real-time feedback.
Yeah. But I think it also helped like some of the performers acknowledge and appreciate the other people that are around them, because like you said, Poon, like when people watch they see the stage, but more often than not they see the main person on stage. Like I think of the the accompanists that you're learning music just as much as like the solo instrument is. And I think of like the singers that were in the Apollo, where they're like, we were always in the rehearsal room. Like we would rehearse this like one set, go perform, go back, rehearse for the next set, go perform, rehearse for the next set. So they're continually learning more music, more harmonies. And then that little chunk later where the performers came in, they're like, I didn't know how to write chords out for the house band.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I didn't know how to bring in chord sheets and arrangements. I didn't know that.
Right? So it's kind of like, it's also preparing them not just for themselves, but like for the people that they're going to go out and see, because a lot of these individual, which group was it in here where like the members changed consistently, like the name stayed the same, but the members kept on changing.
Oh, let me see if I can find it.
You know what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah.
And like when you think of these jazz guys that travel along, a lot of the time their band doesn't stay the same. So they're consistently having to have copies of chord progressions and, oh, I need to take this. Oh, you need to learn, like, this is what I do. And showing that you are prepared for the other people that come and perform for you or with you.
I guess that would be like the equivalent of our modern rock groups where it's like, oh, the front man died. But then they hired somebody else to sing like them. Like, don't they have didn't Queen replace Freddie Mercury? I can't remember who they replaced.
And then the Beatles drummer.
Yeah.
Well.
Yeah. So like it's a very it's a musician practice.
Yeah.
But
Show must go on.
The thing that sells is the name.
Yeah.
Style, and the name is what gives you're looking for that music, you go for the name, and it's like the King singers, right?
Yeah.
Or like Cirque du Soleil. You don't really care about the actual individual performance. You go for Cirque du Soleil, right? Or you go for the Rockettes, right? It's the Rockettes, right? Like it's the Rockettes. You don't care who the Rockettes are. You're going for that experience, right?
Yeah.
It kind of brings me to something I wanted to talk about, the way that the Apollo was run. So we talked about like pushing yourselves, making sure like all these people really breaking backs, just trying to get the performances done, backup dancers, backup singers, the sets, everything was just going. Some of these people will be performing 5 to 7 times a day.
Yeah, which was
for like 31 weeks, right?
Yeah.
And the only reason why they could do that was because it made the Apollo Theater money.
Yeah.
So let's talk about this, and I think this will be our first sensitive topic.
Mm-hmm.
I think this book had really showed in a very, very kind of realistic light how running something like a theater really is. Up here in Canada, we have this thing called the Heritage Fund and the Canada Council of the Arts. So a lot of the funding for a lot of public houses, like for example, the Victoria Symphony, the Vancouver Symphony, it's funded by our public dollars because it's part of heritage. So actually, Big Symphony, without the funding of the Canadian government, would shutter immediately because the vast majority of their funding comes from our taxpayers' dollars. We can talk about whether or not that makes any sense, but the Apollo had to make money for itself. They had to run everything on its own. So yes, you might see the Schiffman family as shrewd, right, as businessmen, but they ran it like a business because they had to keep the lights on. There was one part in the book where people are just like, wait, why do you have to do all this stuff? Why do you have to constantly worry about money? And they're like, well, if we don't, no Apollo.
Yeah.
Right? Like in the end, unfortunately, we have to bump people to make more money because we need to pay you and you and you and me. We need to keep the lights on. And if we can't, no Apollo. Right? So I think the grim reality of a lot of this is that in the end, you do need someone at the helm who knows how to make money. And it just so happened that I think Bobby Schiffman, right? Yeah. Bobby Schiffman, he just had an aesthetic ear. He just knew this is the next big thing. This is the next big thing. And he had all these connections, this entire network, right? And extortion and, bullying and blackmailing, but he kept that place afloat.
Yeah.
Even through the toughest of times, right? And I know, right, when as an artistic director, people might be like, oh, that's not what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to showcase new talent. But an AD doesn't have to worry about keeping the lights on.
Yeah.
Like running water.
Yeah.
Right? they don't have to worry about paying the stagehand,
Yeah.
right? So
Schiffman recognized how culturally important the Apollo was and what it kind of became, what it represented. He understood that in order to keeping it going, he had to make those hard decisions. But was it 1965 they put the Apollo on sale, but it didn't sell?
it's 75, right?
It sold to.
I sold to a real estate company.
Well, okay, so it was on sale for a really long time.
Yeah.
But and before it was sold, and then when it was sold, it was kind of like they didn't really know what to do with it, and then they redid the whole thing, didn't they? They completely renovated the theater, and then it maybe lasted for, was it 5 years or something? Like it didn't last very long.
For a long time, but then they held off because the Schiffmans wanted to give it back to wanted to give it back to the culture that it came out of. So they held off, and they actually turned down a lot of offers, I believe, for the Apollo. Like there were other companies that wanted to buy it, and they turned them down, and they wanted to wait for a very specific person to come. And I think that was that.
It was the AOL.
Percy Sutton? Was it Percy Sutton? Is that who it was?
Yeah. Percy Sutton of the real estate group. So,
Broadcasting Corporation.
Yeah. So what happened was with this person, I believe he was African American.
Yeah.
So they were like, oh, we want to sell it to you because you are part of the community and you'll know kind of what the community wants. But at that point, sorry?
He lost it though.
Yeah.
He put his own money in. Richard D. Parsons, that was the guy that came. He made a board.
Yeah.
And that's when, that's when
he's the AOL.
Yeah, he's the AOL.
They wanted to have a Black entrepreneur. They wanted somebody that was in that community that would continue that community's
kind of knew the history of the Apollo as well. Yeah.
Because I think like that's one of the cool things I really kind of appreciate about the Schiffman family was that they knew their time was up.
Yeah.
And they didn't hold on. Right? They're like, it's time for the next generation to come, and they just stopped completely, right? I know that like the economic downturn was happening there too for the Apollo, but the fact that they knew spiritually and emotionally, like our time is done. We've done all we can. It's time for the next generation to bring up, and for them to see the importance that, especially in this current culture, who's at the helm really, really matters. For them, they always played behind the scenes. Right? So no one really, like everyone knew who he was. They loved him. They didn't care. But they understood that right now people do care and they can't do it anymore. They have to take a step back. I thought that was like very noble of them. I thought it was really cool to see. Yeah. Like understanding, you're like, oh, like my baby birds have grown up. They need to fly out of the nest. I'm gonna let them go now. You know, that kind of thing. So I thought that was really cool. But like he was there for the right amount of time, nurturing the right people, doing the right things, right? Yes, he wasn't really a person that gave a lot of second chances, because for him it was just like, you're hurting my pocketbook. I can't afford you to hurt my pocketbook, right? But it sometimes, unfortunately, is that ruthless, right? In some places, like you get asked to play like a summer concert series, and you don't make a lot of money, and the audience is kind of like mediocre feeling about you, you're not gonna get asked back. And it doesn't matter what type of music you play, what genre or which type of music series you're gonna do. If you're not popular, you're not gonna be asked back, right?
But that just goes back to the whole, like the audience determines exactly how much and how well you will succeed.
Yeah, and that was a really cool way to kind of like be like, I do own and run the place, but I also acknowledge that if you're not going to come back, right, then I can't run a business like that. I need to know what you want. And I think that's why he was so open. He was also extremely closed to certain ideas, but he was really open to like, oh, there's a new thing. It's really popular in Philadelphia. Bring them here, right? Oh, this person, like, oh, he's from the South. I'm not really sure if people really want the Southern type of music up here in the North. I'm not really sure. And he gave him a chance and it worked. You know what I mean? Like he was stern, but you could still bend him in some ways, right? Yeah. Like people could still convince him to try, and people who convinced him bombed or were
Yeah.
successful, right? It was both ways. So like it's just like, oh, he still takes chances, but you understand how expensive a chance is.
Yeah. And his name got really big because with the connections he made, the ones that were successful were like, hey, I have this friend. She's amazing. You should come meet this guy named Bobby Schiffman. He runs the Apollo. You should come to the Apollo and give it a try. So it's just like the network that was spread out through it. And it went so much further than just like New York and the North, but it spread so far.
And the equalizer.
Yeah.
Even though you're famous, you got to win amateur night.
Yeah, that is true. And
right? And I love that. Like, I love the fact that like he was just like, oh, you're Ella Fitzgerald, you're great. You still got to win an amateur night.
Yeah.
You got to prove yourself. I don't care how famous you are. You got to prove yourself, right? And I was like, oh, that's so cool. That's so cool. It's like everyone's got to run the gauntlet.
Yeah.
This is how our family runs.
Yeah.
If you run the gauntlet and you get out, like you get out of the other side alive,
Yeah.
you will be like folded into the family forever. You will be family forever, right? Your picture will be on that wall forever, right? And I thought that was really cool. It's like that great equalizer. It didn't matter if you were, you know, like, yeah, a mime, right? It didn't matter if you're a comedian. It didn't matter if you're a performer or singer or whatever. Everyone ran the gauntlet.
Yeah.
Right. And I thought that for me was really cool. I know for some people it's like that could be extremely stressful. But it's the gauntlet. Yeah, it's the gauntlet. Right? You gotta run it. Yeah.
But it makes sense. Like I think in a lot of this, like how this book was presented, I think it also for people who are not musical and people who have not done stuff like Friday Music or like WinSynth or stuff like that, I think it kind of gives a really good insight of like this is what it takes to perform. Like performers don't always just kind of like walk on stage and be like, hey, look at me, I'm amazing. It's you know, you're standing behind, they're like, okay, do I have everything? Do I have my music? I like for me, I was like, do I have my reeds? Do I have like a second you know, my extra ligature? Do I have this? Do I have this? Am I ready? Or is the performance like all these things? And then unfortunately also seeing the fallback of the not so positive things that might happen out of the stresses of performances like narcotics and booze and drugs and you know, the whole being too famous too quickly and too young. Mm-hmm. So like when they talk about the good and the bad of the Apollo, it's also the good and bad of being a performer, of being an artist and being put in that spotlight. So it's interesting to see, you know, how some have been so wildly successful, but then to see some of these huge names kind of just buckle under this pressure. And like, you know, for us knowing, like personally knowing people who are like sweating bullets backstage trying to get on. And then as soon as you walk off, it's like, I can breathe again because I have completed my time on stage and it went well and I didn't screw up. So yeah, that was kind of one of the other kind of big things was seeing that what we kind of, and I guess for us personally, what we felt as we go on is stuff that will always be like people still feel gross sometimes going on and coming off.
And also a caveat too, like I just wanted to like bring to attention, this is not just an African American thing. This is not just a certain part of the city kind of thing. Drugs and alcohol have permeated even classical music from a long ago. Berlioz was a known user, right, of opium. Debussy was a known user of opium. We know countless composers who took to alcohol. We know countless colleagues and professors who took to alcohol, right? I know a professor who uses absinthe. This stuff is not just in popular music. It permeates all forms of like, especially performance art in music. So I wanted to make sure like this is not just one little thing.
No,
this has always been happening, right? Like people try to find things to relieve their stress or to find inspiration, right? And unfortunately, that sometimes becomes substance abuse. So this is not just the people at the Apollo. So like I know in the book, they were like, there was these drug dealers that are literally outside waiting for these people to catch them, right? Right. yes, I understand that if you just look at it as a microcosm, you're like, oh, like it's probably Harlem, it's probably that area was bad. No, even the big name composers of classical music had access to drugs and alcohol. It just so happens that the access was through their aristocrat friends, but it was still a dealer. They were still doing all these things. So it wasn't just this one instance here. So I just wanted to make sure everyone knew that. Like, we know we have historical like evidence that these composers were also doing drugs, right? And they created some of the most beautiful music that we've ever heard of, right? So it's like, I understand, and it's really sad because in this book, like for example, Billie Holiday succumbs, and I love Billie Holiday, but we know that she succumbs, but let's not sensationalize that. Like, she is a beautiful person, and it doesn't diminish her because she had a drug problem.
Yeah.
Right. But we should talk about it in the future. Is like, how do we help our performers and our composers and our artists like not have to use that to push themselves to the point where they have nothing left, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, how can we make it more safe? But just wanted to say, like, it has been a thing, it's an ongoing thing, and it's not a popular versus classical thing. Everyone, like, people do it.
Yeah. Because you can see in Hollywood too, the amount of stories that come on and they're like, so and so has they have quit this movie because they've gone to rehab, and it's an unfortunate truth. It's a lot of pressure to be put in a spotlight for all forms of entertainment and all forms of people. So yeah.
And I think like for people who are like watching this and they're like, oh, why can't they do exercise or meditate or something? I understand. Like, I think we need to acknowledge that everyone experiences and deals with stress in a different way.
Mm-hmm.
And it is a privilege to be able to do those things.
Sorry, it also has to do with the culture.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
If they go backstage and everybody's playing poker, smoking cigarettes, and drinking,
Mm-hmm.
it's there, it's available, right? It's that easy vice.
Mm-hmm.
So it's the change in the culture, or giving more strength, or something. Yeah, giving more support.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's also like we were talking about, like in our disclaimer, the like systemic racism. A lot of these things are systemic, right? It's like the previous generation did this, and it kind of just becomes a cultural thing that moves through the community, and it has nothing to do with your color of your skin. That's just what happened, right? And if that's the culture, and especially if you're young and you're impressionable, right, and everyone's doing it, it's, of course, yeah, obviously you're going to have people who are going to like, no, I can't do that, and that's cool. But you have to also realize that people will, right? They will partake because they see it as, oh, everyone's doing it, right?
Yeah.
And it becomes kind of almost normalized, desensitized, right? And that's not just drugs. It could be anything, right? And yeah, I think that's a couple of things that I really appreciated about this book was that it, like, especially talking about the drug abuse and stuff, that was hard to kind of go through and read through, because I have never had a friend who has gone through a drug problem.
Mm-hmm.
But because of that, I also acknowledge my privilege that I do have friends who don't have to, right? And I choose my friends that way, right? It's my privilege to be able to surround myself with people like that, to be in a community where it's not as rampant, right? Some people don't have that choice, right? And I think, like, above all else, a lot of the stuff that especially this book brings out is just the privilege of choice, right? Some of us have more than others, and we have to realize that, right?
Yeah.
But even like the like going on from that, like even the history of protests, right, in and around Harlem and in New York City, I think sometimes for me, and I'm not sure if you two can relate, I sometimes see the photos of like Martin Luther King Jr. I see all those photos, and they're black and white, and I was like, oh, that's from a long time ago. That was like less than 100 years ago. Like, you know what I mean? Like it happened relatively recently. These things were recent, right? recent events. And sometimes when I read about the historical like events leading up to these riots and these protests, the way that it's portrayed is like it was so long ago. Like we've come a very long way, but we haven't, right? Like during the time of this book, all of those protests, right? They were like 80 years ago, like 70 years ago. Like within the lifetime of my grandparents, these happened, right? People fighting for their freedoms and their rights, right? People fighting for their lives to be protected and to be safe in their communities, right?
Yeah.
I think that was also really hard too, like being kind of like hit, be like, wow, we have a lot of progress, but we still have a very long way to go. And this is quite recent, right? People fighting for the right to vote, people fighting to be free from like even like the Jim Crow, right? Like it's legislation and stuff. It's just that's what really hit me. It was like I really appreciate this book because of the music, but I also appreciate that it took the music and the current events and all this stuff and like this is all happening at the same time.
Yeah.
You can't just look at the music and disregard why people were singing the blues and trying to express themselves because they were being repressed, right? They were being persecuted.
Yeah.
And that's why their music was so emotional. That's why people understood where they came from, because it like when they sang about heartbreak, they were singing from experience, right?
Yeah, I think one of my favorite parts of it was when they were explaining the blues, and they said, well, if you don't get the blues, if you don't understand the music, it's because you've never had a reason to understand the blues. You've never had the tragedy where as soon as you have the tragedy and you have the sorrow, you will understand the blues. And it was this like, you step back and you're like, oh, okay.
Mm-hmm. Well, and to the point where they realized that they couldn't perform blues anymore because it made people feel so bad.
Yeah.
And so emotional that they would just leave, right?
Yeah.
And they got to the point where like it was so impactful. And I think sometimes I forget just how impactful art can be for people, right? Mm-hmm. I forget that like for someone when they listen to something, it could just break them down. Yeah. And they understood how powerful music was, especially that genre, that they had to stop performing it because people didn't want real life in the theater. They wanted to escape.
There was that story, please correct me if I'm wrong, with Nina Simone and her song Strange Fruit.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah.
She's very well known for this song, and she would always sing it. And she would be going on stage and they're like, please don't sing that song. Please don't sing it. It's absolutely horrible. And she would go, no, I'm singing this song because we need to feel it. We need to keep it in our awareness. And like, I really admire her for saying, no, I'm going to continue singing this.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, I remember that part too. I had to stop reading the book at that point.
Yeah, you kind of go, oh yeah.
Yeah, that was like a little bit of like a breather moment.
Yeah, because it was like it was there were so many things happening, right? It was just like her right to sing the music. She had to give that music life. She had to tell the story, and the fact that she was fighting against censorship. People were trying to censor her story, censor that music because it was too painful. And she understood, no, it doesn't matter. Like it is painful because it's real. People need to hear this, right? And like I said, like sometimes I forget just how impactful art is, right? Yeah. How powerful. And that's why governments all around try to censor everything.
Yeah.
Right?
Wouldn't that be the argument then for good art? Like this is what good art is because it keeps the conversation going. It provokes, it makes you think.
Yeah. Yep. And like that's why Hamilton, right, the musical was so big because it saw an issue and it just went, we're gonna press on this. And people were like, we don't want you to talk about this. And we're like, sorry, but you have to, because the reality is that this is happening right now. Mm-hmm. And we have to address it. And it's going to be painful. Yeah. It's going to be painful, but we have to talk about it. It's like, I don't know, like whenever I'm feeling like like a huge amount of emotions, like doesn't really matter, excited or whatever. I don't go to like Tchaikovsky, you know?
Yeah, right.
I go to like Black Eyed Peas, Where Is the Love?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Like I listen to those things. Like I listen to Black Eyed Peas, like Anxiety. I listen to those music where it's like you can tell they believe what they're singing because they've experienced it. Like they've experienced the violence, they've experienced the racism, right? And you're like, this, like, I get guttural feelings, like those goosebumps, right?
Yeah.
Listening to these pieces sometimes because it's just so powerful. But it's the same with classical music. There are some pieces where I feel like the composer like is telling me something through the music. Like Chopin, that's why I can't play Chopin, because like I get really emotional when I play Chopin,
Oh.
because there's so much sadness and depression in it,
Yeah.
right? Because he was just tormented his entire life, right? And yeah, and that's like the power of like this and kind of being in the moment of like looking at the censorship. And not only that, just like feeling the anger of these artists, knowing that someone took their music
Yeah.
and then gave it to someone else to perform, and then they're making money off of your art. Okay?
Yeah.
They're making money off of your like creativity and your story, and you don't get any credit for it, right? They just take it, right? And like for me, when I read that, I was like, how could this happen? But it was happening all the time at that time, and no one gave these people a voice, right? And sometimes I think like by reading this, you realize this is why people now are shouting so loud, because people have been like society have been repressing these voices for so long, and they've been treating them so poorly for so long that they have nothing else but to start screaming, being like, please listen to us. This has been happening forever, right? People taking away our livelihoods, people taking away our artistic creativity, saying it's their own when it's, and they don't acknowledge it that it's not their own, that they borrowed it from someone, right?
Yeah. And I remember being in, I believe that history of rock and roll class, and we talked about that very specific song, Shaboom. And I remember sitting in class about how like it was not how it was given to another group to make it more pleasing or whatever, and how it, when they talked about covers, that like that's what you're talking about with the covers. I found it really interesting because when you go on YouTube now, everybody does a cover. Everybody covers everybody else. Artists cover other artists. You know, amateurs cover all this kind of stuff. But back in that time, covers were so, I don't want to say like taboo, but like you don't do it. Like you don't just take somebody's music and make it and perform it for yourself. And yet now we have groups that make a living literally covering other people's music. Like you think of like Straight No Chaser or Postmodern Jukebox.
Yeah, the difference is that they are acknowledging that it's a cover, right? Whereas this group is like, oh, here's our hit single. It's a complete rip-off of this other person, but we're not going to tell you. It's our original. And so it's the taking someone else's song and saying it's theirs. Yeah. And then they make the money off of it. They sell the records. Whereas the covers, yeah, maybe they do make more money on that one video because they are covering it, but they are still saying, oh, here's our cover of, because they're going to be found out if they say, oh, it's my original song, and they're singing like Beyonce's Crazy in Love. Like, no.
But it's that terminology of like the same terminology. Like we could have thought of another word of doing that practice
stealing.
To use that
stealing.
Like, literally stealing.
They were stealing people's music.
Stealing music.
Literally stealing. I know.
Yeah.
I think that's the like some of the not the I don't want to use the word sad. The reality of the current situation is that like people who do covers, they have to pay royalties, right? They can't just like, for example, whenever I do an arrangement on YouTube, I don't make money off of it. Be it I get dinged immediately for copyright infringement, right? But the copyright infringement is only there to make the labels money, not the artists. So even though we think it's better now, it's still not better. That money still does not go to the artist. If you remember Taylor Swift, right, recently had a huge argument for her previous label that owned all of her music and owned all of the music videos, and she fought them because they were like, oh, they just like redid this like music video, like this concert, a live concert of her like way back when, and she called them out on it and was like, yeah, that's bullshit. That was from like 2014 or something like that. And you're saying it's 2017? No, 2014, right? But like it's happening here, like Lady Gaga stepping up to show her support for Kesha, right? During that incident. But they were both Sony record label like performers.
Yeah.
Since then, I think Lady Gaga has left, but like these labels protect their merchandise essentially, right? Which is the artist, but the music. Like Michael Jackson, when he passed away, right? Yes, his family wanted some of this like recorded but not published music to come to light. So we since had like a couple of posthumous CDs.
Yeah.
But if it didn't make the labels money, they wouldn't have done it.
Yeah.
They did it because they would make the money, right? And so that's the thing, is like even though it's different now, it's still the same. The artists, whether black or white, still do not have total control.
Well, that was the question. Like, how big do you have to be to actually have control of your own career? Like when in this books, like James Brown was the first person at the Apollo who could say, I want this here, I want this here, I want this to be done thus. He was like the first person to actually have control over what he wanted, as opposed to being told, this is how you're going to do things. So you kind of wonder, like, as big as some of these groups are, or artists or groups or whatever, performances, like how big do you actually have to be to actually be in control of and say, like, I copyright my music because it is my music.
Well,
right?
And that's like, I mean, it's interesting because we're talking about like current day now, right? But like so many of these artists are young, up and coming, and have no idea how the industry works.
Yeah.
Which is why Lady Gaga is so interesting, because she was a producer before with a music background. She had a degree in classical music, right?
Yeah.
So she had the education and the knowledge on how everything worked.
Mm-hmm.
And even then, she still had to sign to a label.
Yeah.
Right? Because in the end, you could, like, I mean, if you go to any local like music fest, you'll have local artists and you'll buy their CDs and whatever. They'll have things online, and we follow, like, we know the Kennedy twins.
Yeah.
Right? And they're amazing. I love their music. They're the only, like, one of like 3 country artists I listen to. But they're not selling out Madison Square Gardens.
Yeah.
Right? Like their YouTube videos have like maybe a couple thousand, 10,000, 20,000 like views. Yeah. Right? They're not big because they don't have a label machine advertising, promoting them, right? Sending out all this information. And sometimes artists just want to make music. They don't want to worry about like how to make CDs, where to broadcast, how to advertise, all the legal stuff. So they pay a label to do it. They pay an agent to do it, right? Yeah. Not knowing that down the road when they become big, most of that money they're never going to see.
Yeah.
Right. So this is not like, this is not us like being like, you should have known better.
Yeah.
I think like we're all old enough to understand we all have made decisions that weren't in our best interests when we were younger. Not to this point where someone owns our creativity, but like, have some sympathy for these people. Like a lot of people are literally 14, Justin Bieber, 14 when they get signed to a label. They don't know better. Yeah. Like their parents probably don't know better because they're like, well, we could hire a lawyer, but that's tens of thousands of dollars. We do not have tens of thousands of dollars because, we're like a middle class Canadian family, right? So a lot of people get tricked. And this happens as well back here, right? Except like literally you had a situation where we didn't have the internet, right? We didn't really have the distribution lines that we have right now globally. So if someone were to rip off and literally steal your music and perform it for live television nationally, it doesn't matter what you say. You didn't perform it first in the eyes of most Americans.
Yeah. And the thing is, like a lot of that knowledge like that Lady Gaga had, it's not common knowledge. It's not like we are taught this. Yeah. Like it's actually quite kind of hush knowledge when you when you finally, if you ever, get to know somebody who has signed with a record label, and if you see like their contracts, they're like these minuscule little typing, and there's caveats for everything. It's like section
and
1.
they're probably thicker than your book, the book that we're reading, right?
Yeah.
The amount of pages you have to go through.
And everything is an and if, or if and, like if this happens and this happens, then like if and then. So it's kind of crazy that it's a very slim, it's a very thin line that they walk between like, what can I do to keep my own versus what can I do and then I have to give it up.
Yeah.
And then later,
sorry.
And then like later you see with like Kesha and with Taylor Swift, it's like, oh, but no, those are mine. And now I have to enter into the big legal battle where even though there's a contract, it's still my creative. It's mine. Like, my label didn't come up with the song. I did. I put the words down. I put the music down.
Yeah. There was they briefly touched on it in the book, was the payola scandal.
Yes.
Where
Yes.
bribed to play certain music so that that would get more airplay.
Yeah.
So it is one of the reasons why some artists became more popular, because their agents that had money could pay the disc jockeys to play that record even more. So there was that whole scandal that ended up, amplifying, there's always that unfairness with any market, any merchandise, any music company.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a tiny little thing on that payola thing where it's like this, and it was a little box that said this might be the only instance where a man would replace a machine. And I was like, that is an interesting comment, because it, you could, like, you can't control, if you stick it on random, you can't control a computer to play whatever, but yes, you can pay a disc jockey to play your record. So,
and even like taking it to today, like present day. So DJs that we know of on the radio, in Canada, they have to play a minimum 30% Canadian content.
Yeah.
Because that is protected under Canadian law, right? So they have to play that, but you also have to understand that there are royalties. So whenever you play something, you have to pay royalties, right? So people are just like, oh, so like they might not play a certain thing because it's expensive. Not really. So what happens is, let's say there's a huge hit, a new hit, and everyone wants to listen to it. Then you want to pay, like you're paying royalties because you need to play that. But if your song is not as new, these label companies will come to you and be like, here's a couple of $1,000, play our song this many times, right?
Yeah.
So then there's a back and forth. The DJs and the radio stations pay money out, but then there's money coming in constantly. So even the music that we listen to on radio is catered, right? It is completely controlled by, first of all, what the genre of music is, and then also who's paying you to play and what are you paying to play, right? Yeah. So there is that. So you're still listening to a very, very, very like kind of like limited, censored list of music, and it's always the same music, because guess what? People want to listen to the latest.
Yeah.
That's why a lot of local artists don't make it onto radio, because they don't have the money to pay the radio station, right? So there is still that paywall, right? Unfortunately, even to this day, right? So it's really interesting. Like I mentioned, like reading this book, being like, oh, like we have progress, but we still have a long way to go.
Yeah.
Right? In terms of like having not just equality, but equity when it comes to showcasing our artists and showcasing their talent and giving them like,
Another thing that they put it through the ringer with radio is it appropriate? Because there was an instance in there where the song was too racy that they couldn't put it on the radio. They're like, we can't put that.
It's interesting because
but
that's why we have radio edit versions of songs now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right? Because it's like for Britney Spears, it's work it, right, on the radio, but it's actually work bitch, right, on her album. We have radio edits because of the sensitivity of radio listeners.
Yeah.
Very interesting, right? Like all the stuff that we know exists now came from this time period where they had to just change things on the fly. The
CeeLo Green song.
Yeah.
Forget
you.
And the thing is, when you listen to it first on the radio, you're like, oh, this is what the song is. And then you get the album, you're like, oh, this is what the song actually is.
Yeah.
That makes sense. They had to censor this. Like certain, like, and it's interesting because like that whole first impression, right? Like I've had friends where they're like, oh, I really love this song by so and so. I'm like, that's not the original artist, right? Like, that it was actually done by somebody else in like the 60s, and they're like, no, but I heard it. I'm like, yeah, that's a cover. They're like, no, and I'm like, no, trust me, this is a cover.
Yeah, my favorite is which one? If You Could Read My Mind.
I forgot.
So everyone knows A Stars on 54th. Like,
yeah.
But the original one was a folk song.
And
right?
New York was one.
Oh, Empire State of Mind. Yeah. So I was going to talk about that. So Empire State of Mind was really interesting, talking about things.
Oh, Empire State of Mind.
Yeah. So Empire State of Mind was produced and recorded by Alicia Keys, and it was on her album. And Jay-Z was the producer, owner of the music. He released his rap cover arrangement version of it first.
Yeah.
Before Alicia Keys' original version.
Yeah.
So hers was the original version.
Yeah.
Like the one that's a ballad in her album. And she sued his ass.
Yeah.
Because that was, it wasn't fair. But he owned the music because he was the label, right? So that was really interesting. Thank you for bringing it up, because I was like, there was something I wanted to talk about. Yeah, it happened. Like, this is like less than 10 years ago or something like that. It still happens today. And Jay-Z and Alicia Keys are both African American, right? So it's like it still happens. In the end, it's about making money, right?
And it's
a lot of times, right?
Yeah, and it's interesting that I don't know why I thought it's before, but so many artists actually don't write their own music. Like we connect these songs with certain artists, like Justin Bieber does "Love Yourself" or whatever, and all this. We connect them with this, and you're like, oh, he's a singer. It's like, but he didn't write it. I think Ed Sheeran wrote that. Yeah. Ed Sheeran wrote the music and said, here you go, you can go ahead and perform this. So it's. When we talk about singers, it just seems like such a big grain of salt that you have to take with it. It's like, yes, they are, and the difference between the writing version versus the performer, and it's something that I feel that I try to teach my kids, like my students. It's like, this is the performance of this song by this artist. Did he write this? Not necessarily. Like, you need to take a look at some of this stuff. So-and-so did not write this song. This song was written by somebody else.
Or it'll say, like, Justin Bieber, and then lists 20 other names.
Yeah,
Maybe he's like, oh, I want to write a song with this hook, and he hums something, and then a whole team takes that theme, and they're like, yeah, he totally wrote it.
Right? And then the idea of sampling. Like, the times I've listened, I'm like, that's Dies Irae.
Oh yeah. Or what was it?
All over the place.
Or like the Madonna song, like "Time Goes By" or something, and it uses like the opening of "Gimme Gimme Gimme" by ABBA. Right, and you're like, one of these things not like the other, right? No, but I think it's interesting reading, like going through, like having conversations about this, because like I know on the one hand, for example, like Pink writes a lot of music for people. She writes for Celine Dion, right? And she has people request because she's such a good songwriter. Yeah. Same, right, with like there are some people who perform really well and can write, and there are some people who can write really well, but the performance isn't super good, right? And there are some people who are really good producers and performers, like Pharrell, for example, right? He's a one-hit wonder essentially, but he's really great at producing. So it's like, so you have all these people who are really good at certain things. And it kind of brings me back to performers in classical music. Most of us don't write our own music. We just play other people's music, and we're like, oh, this is our interpretation, right? And then we make thousands of dollars off of it, right? So it's the same thing here in this case. It's like, like Schubert didn't write it for me, but hey, here's the thing. Schubert did write music specifically for performers. Mozart did the same thing. Beethoven did the same thing. They wrote specifically for a performer. So does that mean that only that performer's version is the right version? And like if it's written for them, is it their music? It like because they stylized certain pieces. Like great example, Henry Purcell's Dido and Aeneas, right? He wrote it specifically for this school of girls, knowing that their range and stuff were very limited. Handel's Messiah was written for an amateur choir, right? An amateur group of singers. So like they write specifically for their performers, same as the people today. The only difference is that the performers say that it's their song.
Yeah, it reminds me of, I don't know why, it reminds me of Max Martin and how I don't know if you know who he is. He basically owned the 90s. He was the man who produced and like wrote like all the Backstreet Boy music and like boy bands, like and all the pop stuff. He owned like the 90s. He was just like the biggest name out there. And the thing is, nobody knows who he is. Nobody knows his name. Everybody just thinks like, oh, yeah, all these great songs from these boy bands and these pop artists. It's like, yeah, but somebody else wrote that music. Yeah. And it wasn't until like their later albums that they wrote their own music and produced it themselves. It just kind of it puts that whole idea of like we see literally the actual surface of all these artists, and there's so much stuff going underneath, whether it be politics or just how many people it takes to create a hit song. And if you have somebody that specializes, okay, you need the writer, you need the producer, you need the guy that does PR, you need the performer, you need the label. Like there's so much of it that I think we don't realize is actually going on to create this stuff.
Yeah, but I think there is a really clear line though. So for example, like Alan Menken wrote most of the 90s and late 80s music for Disney, right? He wrote everything essentially. He was Disney in the 90s. And then Joe Hisaishi, right? He is the music of Studio Ghibli, right? Yeah. Like everything that is there, it's him. And then there's Michael Giacchino. He is the composer for all Pixar. Right, but here's the fine line between like our book and here. They chose to take a back seat. Yeah, the people whose music was stolen in the book, they didn't choose. They had no choice. It was taken from them, right? So it's like, yes, in a way, like Sam Smith was sued by I can't remember the person. It's like because his music was too similar. Yeah, that's an indirect conflict of interest because you literally ripped off someone else's music. There is legal battles for that, and you'll lose. Back then, they didn't, and they didn't choose to be in the back seat. They wanted to be in the front, right? Yeah, they wanted to be performing their own music. It was taken from them. So, like, in a way, I do understand, like the Justin Biebers of the world, they're performing other people's music, but those other people chose to give him that music. No, I know. It's an interesting. It is interesting, right? Because it's just even that, right? Looking at that, like being able to argue like, oh, he didn't really write it. She didn't really write it. These people wrote it, right? Even that kind of like, people writing music for you, that's a privilege, right? Yeah. They still get money. Yeah. Right? They still get royalties off of you singing that song. Yeah. But unfortunately, a lot of the artists of the time in the Apollo didn't even get a chance to do that. Yeah. Right? And I think that's what's sad. I know, like I said, like, we've come a long way. We still have a long way to go. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Oh. I think we're good for our discussion, huh? Wow. I really enjoyed our discussion. Like
we started the whole thing being like, we're gonna keep it brief.
Yeah. No, we're not. But you know what? That it just shows like how much discussion can come out of this book. Because one discussion spawns another discussion spawns another. Well,
and the fact that it's really cool coming with some musical training and background and experience, right? We can import what we know because of our education and the way that we kind of like pick out information. We can import what we know and kind of take the stuff that we learned from this book and be like, look, compare these two things, right? Yeah. And be able to compare. Like that's what I really enjoyed about it, is that all three of us have a different walk when it comes to music, but we all found something really cool that that resonated with us in this book. Yeah. And being able to be like, you know what, like this is not our story, but I am mad about this. Yeah. I am upset about this. I am happy, excited about this, right? I'm sad about this. Like we can relate to this in some aspect, but hopefully people understand like this is something that needs to continue to work. We need to continue to talk about this, right? Just like the strange fruit thing. Like, you know, it's gonna be uncomfortable, right? It's gonna be painful to talk about it, but there is still injustice even in the music industry to this day, right? And being able to talk about this book, and I know like some background information for people who are watching, backstage information. We actually talked about not even talking about this book this month.
Yeah.
Right? At one point, we were like, maybe we should find something else because you know maybe this is a little bit too hot topic right now, right? But I'm glad we did it because you know we shouldn't shy away. Like you know we should like people should know that this book exists and know that this book will tell you the good and the bad, the things that you want to know and the things that you might not want to know because it's uncomfortable, right? But it's real. It's a history, right? And it's an ongoing history. And I'm glad we talked about it because I learned a lot, right?
Yeah.
And it was really cool. I liked it. I'm glad. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's going on my shelf permanently. So
That was a good choice, Amanda.
yeah.
Hey, well, you know what? This really this stumbled on my Libby app, and it's like you might like this, and I'm like, it's a graphic novel about music. Yes, so much yes. And for anybody that is wondering, in 1983, the Apollo has been designated a landmark, so it's not going anywhere. It is here to stay, and yeah, it's kind of cool. Yeah, this is a keeper.
Yeah.
And like there are pages that I would like, especially some of them. There are some pages that I would like photocopy and be like, this is a great learning tool. Here you go.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And the Apollo is still
It's still going.
a landmark for cultural revolution. I mean, just think every drag race like finale is in the Apollo.
Yes. And
right?
they still have the Wednesday night amateur night.
Yeah. Right. And they're still pushing and they're still protecting the culture that's evolving around them.
Yeah.
And people still see it as a beacon of hope, right? I think that's really cool. And I think that really kudos to the Schiffman family.
Yeah.
Sticking to their guns and being like, we need to find someone who's from the community, who understands the community. And it took a couple of decades, right, to find that person. But I'm glad they held out and they said no to certain companies, right? And so thank you so much, right? Because you guys have given like the American people a shining beacon. This, you can still have these institutions. They can still be something that protects the people and helps the people. And I think that's really cool. The hope that there's still that this theater still has. Yeah.
And such the absolute rich history that comes with it is
It kind of makes me want to actually go to the Apollo Theater. I
want to go to the Apollo and sit in and be like, yeah, I'm in the Apollo. This is so cool. Next time there's a drag race finale.
All right. So next pick is Karen's pick. So Karen, do you have something for us?
I do. I read it as an ebook. I've already read it.
Okay.
It's really short. I don't know if you can see that.
Music for Tigers.
There you go. Thank you. Music for Tigers by Michelle Katarusman. And I don't know, it popped up on my radar and I went, well, it's a kid's book and it's short.
I like it.
And I can't remember. She lives in Canada. She's not Canadian, I don't think. She's lived in a whole bunch of places. But the premise got me. It's about this girl named Louisa, and she's going for the summer to spend time in Tasmania. She would rather be practicing for her audition for the Toronto Youth Symphony Orchestra. But she goes instead to Tasmania, where she discovers, there's some heritage with her musicality, and that she learns all about extinct animals and protection of animals in Tasmania. And it's this lovely little bite-sized bit of it's really good. So that's going to be our next one. Sorry, I know I've already read it, but spoilers.
Oh.
But it's short and it's lovely. So that's going to be our next pick.
All right. The Indigo in Victoria has a copy of this, so maybe I'll go down and pick it up later.
Have we had a kids book?
This is our first kids book. We're doing a lot of firsts.
Oh my goodness.
Have we had a kids? I don't think we've had like a children's or middle school.
No.
All of our
No.
books have been like a straight up adult books.
Yeah.
So this one, already, if I ever taught a lit course, I would teach this book, I think.
Oh.
Ooh.
So it has things that you can talk about. So
Yeah.
anyway, and it's short. So
It was a Governor General's Award finalist.
Yeah. I think that like that's what's really cool, right? Like it's just like these books are written well.
Yeah.
Well, and I think like that's what's fun. I mean, like I think I always say this every single time we do a video or a recording. I'm glad we all bring different types of books
Yeah.
that I normally wouldn't gravitate towards.
yeah.
And you're keeping this one.
Yeah, like because the thing is like I would never read a graphic novel. I would never read a young person's book or a children's book, but because I have to, I you know what I mean? I read it and I was like, hey, this is actually really good, right? And the fact that even like when I'm looking through stuff, I was like, I have to find something with a music theme. I wouldn't normally look for that type of book, right?
Yeah.
But it's been so nice to be able to read things like both like like the history of the Apollo Theater, like the history of like the Cultural Revolution in China, the history of like digital music, right? Like talking about like the piano stores and stuff in Europe and like the culture that they kind of create around them. Like that's been really cool. And then also like the fluffy stuff with like rock musicians and sex, and then like music and silence, and like the crazy queen and everything, right? Like I'm glad we get a chance to read this stuff because it exposes me. And like now that we're kind of getting into more educational things, it exposes some of my students because I'm definitely going to recommend. I have one student who really likes jazz, and so I'm going to recommend this. I'm just going to lend it to them, as long as he doesn't break my binding, because my book is in pristine condition.
He's gonna, that, right?
Yeah.
I would suggest taking the dust cover off and keeping that and just give them the hardcover.
Oh yeah, maybe. Yeah, but like it's like that's the thing. It's like I now have all these music books. Like I've actually like Christy. I've actually lent her my version of Do Not Say We Have Nothing, right? And I was like, you will appreciate this, because you get it. Some of your ancestors grew up in that time, right? And they can probably speak to what happened because a lot of her family fled China, right? So I was like, you should read this, right? And then like Music and Silence, I think I have a friend who's really into period books, and I was like, no, you like this one too. Yeah, so it's been nice to be able to expose people because, like, I think, like you mentioned, right? Sometimes these books, they're not written for non-musicians.
Yeah.
But Music and Silence totally is. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That could go either way. Like we also had what's it called? That it wasn't Nocturnes. It was Chimes. That was also very specifically written for musicians, and that was
yeah. But then we also like had Bel Canto, which was very generic. Open, but like because we know now, we can be like, oh, you like something with a music twist, and you don't know anything about music. Here is a book that just like gives you like the superficial, right? A couple of name drops here, and then like a couple of like technical things here, but you don't need to know music. Oh, you're a music buff. Please read this. Right?
Or you like stories about women that sort of are kind of repressed or whatever. Okay, here's the Mary Sherratt book, right?
Oh,
like,
yeah.
Here's the like, oh, she's a wife, but she has to be a mother, but she can't have her own career. Like
You want a big pile of confusion? Here is Discworld.
Yeah. Or no. What was the one that talked about
Loser?
Glenn Gould, the loser? Yeah, read the loser.
Do you want just like a train of thought book? Here's the loser.
Yeah.
Do you hate yourself? Here, read this. Do you like German philosophers? Read this. Oh, except he's not German, but like it's the same kind of
same idea.
Yeah. Like, do you like detective stuff? We have 2 detective books, Basket Case and Strings of Murder.
So Strings of Murder, I've been keeping up with the series. There are now 4 books in. I have all 4 of them, and I don't even know how much more I could love these 2 because they're just so funny together.
Is it still music themed, or is it just
no? One of them is drama. So there's the Happy Sad Mask. So one of them is about that. Another one is, I think the latest one is about McFray's crazy sister, and like trying to, is she actually crazy? Did she actually murder the family, or didn't she? But I've been keeping up every time, and there's a 5th book coming out, so I've been actually keeping up with this series. And it's just funny because you have like the uppity British dude, and then like the drunken Scottish man who's missing a finger, and he's like, whatever, we'll just kick down the door. And you're like, love him. It's great.
All right. So our next book, who's the author again? I was
Michelle
going
Katarusman.
Katarusman.
Yeah.
Not Kardashian.
No.
Katarusman.
And you know what? I did watch a couple of her interviews or her promotions so that I could say her name properly, because I'm like, okay, it's exactly phonetic.
Yeah.
Great.
Thank God. Because we've had so many authors who are like, Hyacinth, Hayes, Carl. This book by this author. Yeah. So that's our next book. We'll tell you guys when we're going to meet. I think we might be able to meet pretty quickly, because like if there is a version of this, I can probably this is probably like within a month, right?
It's like 200 pages. So
okay, yeah. I think
and it's a kid's book, so it reads really quickly.
Oh, I like the font. It's a pretty font.
Oh, I like that. It's like it's very rounded and legible for younger kids.
It's really nice. And that's the thing about like young kids books is like fonts they're either like super ramrod straight, or they're you have to go for your audience, right? But the font is pretty. I like it.
All right. Well, until next time, thank you guys so much for joining us. It was a little bit longer, but I think there was a lot of content that we wanted to talk about. And I'm glad we had a chance to talk about it. If you guys have any suggestions for books, let us know. We have like a running like list of books, and we're always finding new things. But if you guys have any suggestions, let us know. Like, it would be great. Like maybe we can finally do one of your suggestions instead of us picking. But let us know. Until next time, thank you so much for joining us. Talk to you guys later. Bye.
Bye.